We interview everyday people like yourself that uplift and empower, shifting the narrative of news from a traditional negative experience to more impactful.
So just to start out, go ahead and give me your name and your pronouns.
Yep, Beth and she, her.
What inspired you to write your first book, Hello Holland?
So I started writing that because when I found out that my son had hearing loss and was deaf, it was kind of the book I was looking for and couldn't find. You know, I found other people who blogged and stuff, but it wasn't a book about it. So I wanted to be able to kind of guide other parents in the same position and give them a little bit of insight into what that, process entails, as well as obviously, hope and showing them that they weren't alone in their feelings.
So in writing, with experiencing your son, did you find it challenging to kind of, I guess, not parent him, but like kind of get him to kind of understand you?
I think it was just a learning process. I mean, so much, normal hearing infants, I think parents struggle with that too, just because they aren't old enough to really communicate their wants and needs. So I think in a way it almost gave us a head start because we started using sign language so early. And even, hearing children can benefit from that because they can actually start understanding, comprehending sign before they can verbalize. So I guess I never really found it challenging. I guess I would say now is probably more difficult than when he was littler, just because he is starting to like use sign and vocalize. And sometimes it's like a game of charades to figure out what he wants to say and can't. But we work well together at this point, so we figure it out.
What inspired you to write the current book you're working on?
The kids' book. I don't know. So much of my writing has always been geared toward parents and adults, but I think a lot of kind of giving kids that insight and understanding starts when they're young versus when they're already grown up, obviously. And just being the parent of a child who does have, additional needs, I want other kids to understand that and be able to, feel comfortable asking questions. And not only that, but, other really common diagnosis too, like Down syndrome and autism and things that you might not be able to see on a child but could still set them apart, or visible differences, so that not only do they have more compassion and empathy towards my child, but a lot of the other children out there too.
So I actually do follow you on TikTok, so I've kind of seen your journey with the book. Have you found it challenging to find like all the different diagnoses from like A to Z?
I would say the first half was easy, just because I didn't, I had all the letters that open, and I didn't have to worry about repeating diagnoses as much. It was easy to kind of fill those in. But getting towards the end, and especially now, I still have these, I have 4 letters left to fill in. It's getting a lot more challenging to just, number one, not repeat a diagnosis, but also I want to balance it. I don't want something that's like super, super, super rare either, just because I do want it to be something that kids might encounter in their lifetime. And then also being mindful of representing diversity. So it's hard to find kids that fit the first letter of the name of the letters I have left, a diagnosis I don't already have. And then also, a lot of my reach is white families, and I want to extend beyond that.
Have you found any diagnoses that you yourself didn't know about?
I'm thinking. Yeah, there's certain people I've encountered who, their kid might have a feeding tube, but the underlying cause for that is something I haven't heard of, certain syndromes. So it's been sort of like a research process for me too. And it's really difficult in that, I can research and write a full, paper on something if I want, because that's the kind of writing that I'm good at. It's hard to take that and put it into 30 or 40 words that a kid can understand. So that's been really eye-opening.
So when you research those diagnoses that you didn't know about, do you ask the parents questions, or do you kind of just go to Google and do it that way, or do you do a combination of both?
A combination of both. So once I've kind of nailed down, what child's going to be where, I have a form and a questionnaire that I have for them to fill out, kind of giving me background on their specific child, adding any photos, because like the illustrations in the book are going to be based off the actual child. But then, going beyond that, I do research a little bit, on Google too, so that I have a full understanding. And then I'm kind of finding that I have to go back to the parent again and clarify some stuff. So it's sort of a like 3-step process.
I know you touched on this a little bit. How has your life changed since, you have a child who is deaf?
Yeah. I think more than anything, it's just made me more like empathetic to what people go through, realizing that there are silver linings and things. I mean, because when we first found out, I would have done like anything I could to change it, because I didn't want his life to be harder or make him, different and make him a target for, kids making fun of him. I was scared that he wasn't going to be able to communicate with me, that he wouldn't like, getting cochlear implants, that we would be making the wrong choice. So I think it's taught me a lot too about just kind of trusting the process and finding the good in it, because now I wouldn't change it, because it's so much of what makes him is, him learning to sign and express himself through signing. And we get to like celebrate those big milestones even more so than I think we would with, I don't want to say a normal child, but a hearing child. Like everything that yesterday he said a 4-word sentence and I like lost my mind because I was so worried that he would never say a single word. So I think that's just been really neat. And then being able to sort of be that pillar, or someone that people can lean on when they're going through the same thing. I have a lot of parents reach out who have like just gotten a diagnosis and are in the same spot that we were in 2 years ago, and it just feels good to know that it's making a difference, because I mean obviously there's downsides and hard sides to like sharing our story too, because we do get some kickback and pushback from the deaf community, especially because there is kind of a divide between sign language and cochlear implants and how those languages can coexist. So I think it's taught me a lot about how the good really does outweigh the bad, and that things can surprise you even when they seem like the end of the world when they're happening.
So when those parents reach out to you, how do you kind of, I guess, guide them?
So I realized that a lot of the questions have kind of, are the same, especially around sign language, and resources to kind of start learning that. So for that specifically, I created a page on my website that I can kind of drive people towards, that makes it easy for them to navigate. Here's resources for you, here's resources for your kid. And then as far as the actual diagnosis itself, I mean, I a lot of times will point them to my book, but also just ask if they have any specific questions. And obviously it's kind of a twofold thing with us, because I get some parents reaching out who their child is diagnosed with Bordenberg syndrome, which is what Cooper has. But a lot of parents who reach out, hearing loss can be a combination of things. It can come, I know when they did our initial like screening for genetics, there was like 150 different genes they submitted, because there can be so many causes. So in some cases it's a very similar story to Cooper, and in some cases it's a little bit different, but still sort of the same root. So I don't know, everybody's different, and I make sure to answer like every message that I see on Instagram, and try to keep up with comments too. So that's the big thing for me, is just being responsive when I can, but also pointing them to that book, because that obviously says a lot more than I can say in a message.
You kind of already answered that. What inspired you to start sharing your story on social media?
I've always been like a pretty open book. I got sober in college actually, and I shared a lot about that. So it just kind of came naturally to me. Writing has always sort of been an outlet and a way for, I mean, when I initially started writing about this and blogging, it was more from my own sake, I think, to kind of process things. And writing is just something that I'm good at. So I've always liked putting it out there because I know that people can relate. So in doing that, I didn't expect it to blow up the way it has by any means. I think kind of shifting that to TikTok especially, and then Instagram, it's been just eye-opening to see how many people relate, or want to follow, even if they don't have a deaf child. They still find it interesting. They're still being educated. They're still learning things that they can maybe put into effect if they come across children or even adults with cochlear implants. You know, I have people say to me, oh, I've never thought about the effect that masks can have on people who, you know, rely on lip reading to an extent, or they don't know that cochlear implants can like connect to Bluetooth and stream things. So it's just kind of a cool way to share that. And like I said, it just kind of naturally, I don't know, started coming, I guess.
How did you feel after your first book came out?
Honestly, just like excited, I guess. I decided to write and publish that book in a 6-week time frame. Like it was kind of crazy. I had been talking to one of my good friends, and you know, I've always kind of wanted to write a book. And she was like, "Oh, why don't you just do it and have it come out on like the 1 year of his diagnosis," which was literally 6 weeks away. And so I self-published that one. So it was kind of my own timeline. I wrote, you know, some of the writing in that book came from blogs that I'd written and kind of changed a little bit. But I mean, otherwise I just kind of powered through it, and then did all the like layout and everything myself and got it on Amazon. And so that was just kind of like, I guess, a relief too, to like see it in real life when it was such a crunch timeline. So that differs a lot from the one I'm doing now, because I am actually working with like a publishing house in Minneapolis.
Now, have you noticed the difference between self-publishing and then working with a publishing company?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still so early on in the process with the kids book, but I think the biggest difference is, like I said, the time frame. Like, I mean, with this kids book, it's going to be probably a year plus start to finish. And so I'm like a month, 6 weeks in or something. So it's a lot more patience for me, because I'm the type of person who likes to just like go when I get an idea in my head. So kind of slowing down, but I know that also like the return in the end is going to be a lot more beneficial than it would be if I had self-published, because, you know, they're going to find or have found an illustrator that matches my vision. They're going to help me through the editing and making sure that it's really digestible for kids, getting it sort of marketed and out there, figuring out where we want to sell it, that kind of thing.
Hold on. So when it comes to, have you started writing the book?
Yeah, I'm about halfway through it.
How do you think you're going to feel after this book comes out, especially now that you're working with the publishing company versus self-publishing?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be, I don't know, it's just going to be different. It's going to be a lot, it's going to feel more real, I guess. I struggle to call the other one a book sometimes because it is short, but I mean, it's in book form. But this one, it's also twofold, you know, working with an illustrator who can bring that vision to life is going to be really cool, because like I said, those pictures are going to be based off the real kids. And just kind of seeing, you know, yeah, it can be frustrating at points for such a long process, but also like when you get to the end of such a long process, there's so much reward in that, I guess, just knowing like what went through it. So I think that's going to be, I'm going to be proud of this one too. And I think it'll have a wider reach just because it's not so specific to, you know, parents of kids with hearing loss, whereas my other one was. This one is more for like any kids and any parents who want to teach their kids about differences.
So when this book comes out, are you going to notify the parents of the children that you used?
Yeah, so it's, I'm going to keep them obviously in the loop the entire time, because I'm asking questions, and, you know, I'll probably be running sort of some of the illustrations by them and stuff. And then as we get closer to sort of launching it, it's almost like having a built-in book launch team, I guess, because, you know, these parents are going to want to share it because their kids in it, which is cool. So they're going to be part of the process the entire time, you know, if they want to be, which obviously they signed on to do it. So I'm hoping that they'll be excited about it and want to share it too.
So when you went and did the initial like outreach for your book, was it just comments that you got on your TikTok and your Instagram?
Yeah, and emails. I probably, between like messages, comments, and emails, I probably got like, I don't know, close to 1,000 different kids and diagnoses. And it was just sort of sifting through that and figuring out like, oh, I already have these letters. Oh, I already have this diagnosis. Some of the kids in the book are actually kids that I know in real life too. So they had kind of been plugged in initially just because I knew that they would be a good fit. So yeah, it was kind of overwhelming at first. And now it's more the opposite, where it's like, I really need to find these final ones.
I remember when you had done the initial TikTok, there was like a whole bunch of comments of people tagging like other TikTok creators and saying like, oh, there's this kid and that kid. And it was overwhelming. Like just looking at it from my perspective. So I can only imagine what it was from yours.
Yeah, I've been able to connect with, some other TikTok creators that I didn't follow previous to this who, some of them are like pretty well known, some of them maybe a little bit less, but it's cool to kind of see that come together no matter what. Because I mean, in the end, it doesn't matter how many followers you have, your kid's your kid, and sharing their story is important regardless of how you do it.
Does this book have an expected release date yet, or is it still just that like 1 year?
Yeah, it's kind of that 1 year, and honestly that could fluctuate a little bit too, because I know there have been like some supply issues just because of COVID. And I actually have a friend from high school who worked with the same publishing company, and I think it's been like 14 months for her, and she's about at the end of the process now. So I think it just kind of depends too on like the deadlines you set for yourself and how quickly you reach them, in addition to what's happening that's out of your control. So I would hope by like spring of 23.
So how did you find the publishing company that you're working for now, or not working for, working with?
Yeah, so through that friend from high school, I knew that she had written a book, and kind of asked her about the process of like, how did you go about this? Because there's 3 types of publishing. There's self-publishing, independent publishing, and then there's like the big publishing houses that you have to like have a manuscript done and submit it, and that's really hard to do. So independence in the middle, and that's what this one is. And so they're still like selective. I think this one accepts like 20% of ideas, but you don't have to have the whole thing done, which made a big difference to me. And then I just had talked to Lauren a little bit, and she was like, well, this is sort of their vision and mission. Here's their website. And when I looked, I was like, yeah, like they really align. They're about making a difference. They work with, different organizations to sort of like donate and that type of thing. And they seemed like a really good fit. Plus they're in Minnesota, which is where I am.
So when you looked at the organizations, did they have any organizations that were like similar to the cause that you're trying to get with this book?
Not like specifically, because they work with adults too. They work with a wide range. So, but I think as we go, so one of the main things that they asked me to do in one of our first meetings was to kind of brainstorm different organizations that do matter to me, and then kind of, we can think about sort of targeting or getting books into that organization to be able to give out to parents or kids. So that's sort of how they implement that.
So when they asked you to do that, what kind of organizations did you kind of go for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still sort of working on that part. I don't have like that comprehensive list, because that's sort of at the beginning, but it's also like, when you're getting into the marketing efforts. But I think it'll be mainly, I mean, obviously places having to do with hearing loss and that aspect, just because that's important to me and what I know the most about. But I think the overarching would just be education systems, which isn't really an organization, but I think that's a big opportunity to kind of educate kids is through teachers and therapists and that kind of thing. But then also any organization that deals with kids who are different to an extent, even like Special Olympics, that kind of thing.
And what publishing company are you working with?
It's called WeINSPIRE, WISEINK.
How do you hope both your books will impact others?
I guess they're different. So with the first one, my hope is that it can, bring comfort to parents who are in those really early days where they're just unsure of what's happening and what the process might look like and which path they're going to kind of choose for their child. I wrote that one, obviously we use sign language and spoken language, which is the path that we chose. Some people might just choose sign language, some might not use sign language and just choose spoken language. So I wanted that one to, show that any of those ways is the right way. There isn't, a set right way. It's not black and white. And I think a lot of parents do get that, just based on talking to them after they read it. And then this other one, obviously the main drive in writing it is to educate kids so that when they, do encounter that child in their class that has Down syndrome, they know what it is. It's not something that's scary to them. It's not something that they, want to comment on or make, tease kids. Like they have that understanding of it in a kid-friendly way, and can kind of, build off that through their life.
So what is I don't know if you're going to know this, but like, what is the target age for this second book?
Kind of like 7 and under. So sort of the same age as the kids in the book that I'm doing. I think I forgot to touch on that earlier, but they, like in real life, are 7 and under. So that's sort of the age range that we're writing it for, is, kind of when kids are getting into school and, being around a lot of other peers.
And then is there any other important information that you want to tell about your book, about your journey?
I don't know. I mean, I think the main thing is sort of what I already touched on, just in that there's been so many cool, like doors that have opened and connections that we've made through this and because of this, that early on, I never would have expected, and I would have traded in a heartbeat for my child to be able to hear. And now it's like I can see the benefits for him. I mean, yeah, certain things are harder for him for sure. He gets tired from listening, tired from, but then he has that ability to literally like turn the world off when it's overwhelming, which I envy sometimes. I mean, it would be great to just sort of unplug. He gets to sleep in total silence no matter where he is. The fact that hopefully us sharing like we do and him knowing that raises him to be confident in who he is and what sets him apart. That's obviously a conversation that as he gets older, we're going to have to open to, is because, it is his story as much as it's our story. And that's where sometimes it's kind of hard to like draw a line, is like, is this my story? Is it his story? Should I be sharing so much? But it's like, he's so little that I kind of have to make that call right now. And as he gets older, I mean, based on his personality so far, I think he's, he loves being in the spotlight, center of attention, whatever. So I don't see it being an issue, but it is something that I'm going to want to like open dialogue about.
Now, as he gets older, are you going to have him kind of interact with the book himself? You might start now, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think, he's, even by the time it comes out, he'll be three plus. So old enough to, understand. He's not a huge book kid just because he is constantly moving. It's hard for him to like sit down and look at something. But I do, obviously I'm going to read it to him and like explain like, this is you, and it'll be dedicated to him too, which I think will be cool.
And then what do you want people to take away from your story?
I'm trying to think like what I haven't already said. I guess just that things are kind of what you make of them. And I try to be mindful when I say that, because even from early on, I found myself sort of like downplaying our diagnosis a little bit, like, oh, it's not cancer, it's not his heart, it's not something that's going to like affect his actual health on a daily basis. Like, and I think that that's true, but it can also be a little bit damaging because it makes you feel like your feelings aren't valid. So like be, grieving this life that you thought your child was going to have and figuring out sort of where to go from there. So I think that's a big takeaway that I want parents to understand, is like, just because it's not the absolute worst case scenario in the entire world, it doesn't mean that it's not something that you can grieve and have to work through. And I mean, literally go through those like stages of grief and acceptance. It's not any less important, if that makes sense.
Thank you for listening. Continue to listen and support our journalism. Continue at WeINSPIRE and support our journalism. Hit us up on all our social media for daily inspiration. Hit us up on all our social media for daily inspiration. Nothing but the good news.